The broken station commander Velrix Carr of the Zenthari governance stood in the central command hub of Station Meridian 7, his forearms moving in synchronized patterns across the holographic displays. Each gesture brought up new diagnostic screens, each screen showing the same terrifying truth. The station was dying. Velrix was not prone to emotional displays. The Zenthari had engineered such weaknesses out of their species 3,000 years ago during the Great Refinement. Logic, precision, and order were the pillars of their civilization. Yet as he watched the life support systems fail one by one, something uncomfortably close to fear crept into his dual-chambered hearts. Station Meridian 7 was not just any outpost. It served as the primary way station for 17 trade routes and housed over 12,000 souls. The station had been operational for 2 centuries without a single critical failure. Until now, status report, Velrix commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked his authority. Life support at 42% capacity and falling. His second officer, Talrix, replied without looking up from her console. Environmental systems are cascading. We have attempted all standard protocols. The core regulator is not responding to any commands. Velrix felt his secondary arms twitch, an involuntary gesture of stress. Time until critical failure? 18 hours. Perhaps less, the numbers were absolute. In 18 hours, the air would become toxic. The temperature would drop below sustainable levels. Thousands would die. The nearest Zenthari fleet was 36 hours away, even at maximum velocity. They had already sent the distress signal. It would not arrive in time. All ships in range have been contacted? Velrix asked, though he knew the answer. Yes, Commander. 7 vessels responded. All are too distant to render aid before the critical threshold. Velrix stood silently, his mind processing options, calculating probabilities, searching for the logical solution that would save his station. The Zenthari way was to analyze, to understand, to apply established procedures, but every procedure had failed. Every backup system had collapsed. The station's perfect engineering had become a perfect trap. Commander, Talrix interrupted his thoughts. We have an incoming transmission. An unknown vessel requesting emergency docking. Denied, Velrix said automatically. We have no resources to spare for visitors. The vessel identifies as Terran. Commander. Velrix felt all 4 of his eyes. Narrow. Terran. Human. The species that had stumbled into the Galactic community barely a century ago with their crude faster-than-light drives and their chaotic approach to everything. The species that somehow made their rickety ships function, despite violating half the known principles of safe engineering. A human ship? Velrix repeated. Why would humans be in this sector? They claim to be a trade vessel. The Wandering Star, Captain Sarah Chen commanding. Inform them we cannot accommodate visitors. We are in the midst of a crisis. Talrix hesitated, her tertiary hands tapping nervously. Commander, they already know. They intercepted our distress signal. Captain Chen is offering assistance. Velrix would have laughed if Zenthari physiology permitted such a display. Humans offering to help with a Zenthari engineering crisis? It was like asking a child to solve quantum equations. Humans were known for their enthusiasm and their surprising resilience. But their technology was generations behind Zenthari standards. What could they possibly offer? Politely decline their offer, Velrix ordered. Commander, another voice spoke up. This was Corvix, his chief engineer. Perhaps we should not be so quick to dismiss aid regardless of its source. Velrix turned his primary eyes toward Corvix. You cannot seriously suggest that humans could solve what our finest engineers cannot. I suggest that we are dying, Commander, Corvix said bluntly. And refusing any possibility of assistance may be premature. The words hung in the air like a chemical cloud. Corvix was right, of course. Logic dictated that any option should be considered when facing extinction. But allowing humans to examine Zenthari systems? The embarrassment would be recorded in the governance logs forever. Very well, Velrix said at last. Grant them docking permission. But make it clear they are to stay in the docking bay. No access to critical systems. 20 minutes later, Velrix found himself facing the human captain in one of the station's conference rooms. He had expected someone large and imposing, matching the human's reputation for aggressive expansion. Instead, Captain Sarah Chen stood barely to his chest height, her frame compact and efficient. She wore a simple blue uniform with various patches and insignias that meant nothing to Velrix, Her face was smooth and unexpressive compared to the complex dermal patterns that conveyed emotion among the Xanthari. "Commander Velrix," she said, extending one hand in the bizarre human greeting ritual. "Thank you for allowing us to dock." Velrix did not take her hand. "Captain Chen, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you our engineers have the situation under control." Sarah's mouth curved upward at the corners, an expression Velrix recognized as a human smile. It often indicated pleasure, but in this context it seemed to suggest something else. Amusement, perhaps. "With respect, Commander, if you had the situation under control, you wouldn't have sent a system-wide distress signal," she said. "My chief engineer is very good at what she does. At least let us take a look." "Your technology is not compatible with our systems," Velrix replied, keeping his voice neutral. "That's interesting," Sarah said, "because before we invented our own FTL drives, we spent decades studying and adapting Xanthari technology. We're probably more familiar with your systems than you might think." This was news to Velrix. He knew humans had been studying various alien technologies, but he had not realized the extent of their focus on Xanthari designs. "Even so," he continued, "our protocols require extensive security clearances before allowing non-Xanthari personnel to access critical infrastructure." "How long do those clearances take?" "Typically between 48 and 72 hours. Sarah's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Commander, I don't mean to be blunt, but you don't have 48 hours. You barely have 18. Your life support is failing in a cascade pattern. I've seen this before." "You have seen Xanthari life support systems fail before?" Velrix asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "Not Xanthari specifically," Sarah admitted. "But I've seen cascade failures in integrated systems. It's usually not the individual components that fail, it's how they talk to each other. The communication protocols get corrupted and the whole network starts eating itself." Velrix felt a strange sensation in his primary brain. What the human was describing matched exactly what his engineers had reported. The individual systems were functional, but they refused to coordinate. The master control was sending signals that the subsystems rejected as invalid. "That is an accurate assessment of our current situation," he said carefully. "However, our engineers have been unable to restore communication protocols." "Because you're trying to fix it the right way," Sarah said. "Following all the proper procedures, running diagnostics, trying to reboot systems in the correct sequence." "Naturally, that is the logical approach." "Except when the logic circuits themselves are corrupted," Sarah replied. "Sometimes you need to bypass logic entirely. Sometimes you need to get your hands dirty and manually force systems to talk to each other. That would violate every safety protocol we have established," Velrix said. "Commander Velrix," Sarah said, and her voice carried a weight that surprised him. "I've been flying through space for 15 years. I've kept ships running with duct tape and prayer when every engineer said they should explode. I've routed power through coffee makers to keep life support online. I've convinced 2 incompatible computer systems to have a conversation using nothing but a 20-year-old tablet and pure stubbornness. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I understand your technology better than you do, but I understand how to survive when everything is falling apart, and right now that's what you need." Velrix studied her for a long moment. Everything about this situation violated proper procedure. But Corvix had been right. They were dying. And this human, with her strange confidence and her talk of duct tape and prayer, offered something his own people could not provide, a different perspective. "What would you need?" he asked finally. Sarah's smile returned, but this time it seemed genuine. "Access to your environmental control center, my chief engineer, and for your people to not interfere while we work. That is asking a great deal." "Yes, it is. But Commander, my ship might be small and my methods might be messy, but I have kept 73 people alive in situations that should have killed them. Trust is a gamble, but right now it's the only gamble you've got." Velrix made his decision. "Very well, Captain Chen. You have 6 hours to make a difference. After that, I must order an evacuation, even though we lack sufficient ships to save everyone." Sarah extended her hand again. This time Velrix took it, noting the surprising strength in her grip. "We'll make those 6 hours count," she promised. As he watched her leave to gather her crew, Velrix wondered if he had just made the best decision of his career, or signed his station's death warrant. Only time would tell if human ingenuity could succeed where Zenthari precision had failed. The human solution, the Environmental Control Center of Station Meridian 7, was a marvel of Zenthari engineering. Crystalline data streams flowed through transparent conduits, while holographic interfaces displayed thousands of readings in perfect geometric arrangements. It was a room designed for order and precision. Then the humans arrived. Commander Velric's car watched from the observation platform as Captain Sarah Chen's crew transformed the pristine control center into what could only be described as organized chaos. They had brought their own equipment, bulky portable computers, coils of cable,
handheld diagnostic tools that looked ancient compared to Zenthari technology,
and several containers filled with items Velrix could not identify. Sarah's chief engineer, a woman named Rodriguez with graying hair and oil stains on her uniform, moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. She was speaking rapidly to her team while simultaneously pulling apart one of the Zenthari interface panels. "Rodriguez, talk to me," Sarah said, her hands moving across a tablet computer that displayed scrolling lines of code. "It's worse than I thought, Captain," Rodriguez replied, not looking up from her work. "The cascade started in the primary environmental node, but it's corrupted the entire communication network. Every system is receiving conflicting commands and shutting down to prevent damage. Can we isolate the corrupted node? Not without shutting down life support completely. We'd have maybe 90 seconds before people started suffocating. So we need to work around it," Sarah said. "Bypass the corrupted pathways and create new ones." Velrix descended from the observation platform. "Captain Chen, what exactly are you doing to our systems?" Sarah looked up from her tablet. "We're performing what humans call a dirty bypass. Instead of trying to fix the corrupted communication protocols, we're going to physically connect the subsystems using our own hardware. It's like creating a new nervous system for the station." "That is impossible," Velrix stated. "Our systems operate on quantum-entangled data streams. Your technology cannot interface with that level of sophistication." Rodriguez laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "You're right, Commander. We can't match your fancy quantum stuff, so we're not going to try. We're going to step it down to something we can work with, route it through our systems, and step it back up on the other side. You are proposing to run our life support systems through primitive human computers?" Velrix felt his secondary heart's rate increase. "Primitive but functional," Sarah said. "And right now, functional is all that matters." One of the human crew members, a young man with bright green eyes and quick hands, called out, "Captain, I've got the first bypass node ready. Testing connection now." The room fell silent as the human activated his equipment. For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the holographic displays flickered and stabilized. A small section of the environmental grid turned from red to amber. "Ventilation system Alpha 7 responding," Talrix announced from her monitoring station, surprise evident in her harmonic tones. "Temperature regulation restored to that sector." "One down," Sarah said. "About 300 to go." Velrix watched as the humans worked with extraordinary speed and coordination. They did not follow the careful, methodical approach of Zenthari engineers. Instead, they improvised, adapted, and moved with a fluid efficiency that seemed almost reckless. Yet it was working. "How did you learn to do this?" Velrix asked Sarah as she worked beside Rodriguez to configure another bypass node. Sarah's attention remained on her work, but she answered, "Necessity, mostly. Human ships are always breaking down in interesting ways. We can't afford to stop and wait for proper repairs, so we learn to make do with what we have." "But the risk," Velrix pressed. "One miscalculation could cause catastrophic system failures." "Commander, we're already in a catastrophic failure," Sarah said, finally looking at him. "The difference is we're not afraid to make things worse in the short term if it means surviving in the long term. Sometimes the safe choice is the deadliest one." As Velrix processed this, he found himself thinking about Sarah's ship. The Wandering Star had docked in Bay 14. He had reviewed its specifications. It was a modified cargo vessel, at least 20 years old, with hull repairs visible even to the naked eye. By Zenthari standards, it should not have been space-worthy, yet it had traveled across 3 sectors and arrived precisely when needed. "Captain Chen," Velrix said, "why was your vessel in this sector? This is not a standard trade route for human ships." Sarah's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. "We were heading to the Kelvary colonies. There was a disease outbreak. They needed medical supplies, but the shipment got held up in customs disputes. We volunteered to make the run. The Kelvari colonies are 3 weeks from here, even at maximum human velocity, and they are not wealthy. They could not have paid you much. They couldn't pay us at all, Sarah admitted. But that's not really the point, is it? People needed help. We had a ship. The math was pretty simple. Velrix felt something shift in his understanding. The Xanthari operated on clear transactions. Services rendered for agreed compensation. The idea of risking a ship and crew for no payment purely because others needed assistance was foreign to his worldview. That is highly illogical, he said. Sarah smiled. Yeah, we get that a lot. Humans aren't very good at logic sometimes. We tend to make decisions based on things that don't calculate. Well, hope, compassion, stubbornness is not a virtue. It is when you're trying to keep 12,000 people alive on a dying station. 4 hours into the repair effort, disaster struck. Rodriguez had been working on a critical junction when a power surge erupted from the corrupted systems. She was thrown backward, her equipment sparking and smoking. The lights in the control center flickered and dimmed. Rodriguez, Sarah was at her engineer's side in seconds. I'm okay. Rodriguez coughed, her face marked with soot. But the junction is fried. We lost about 40 bypass nodes. Captain, the surge came from the core regulator. It's actively fighting our repairs. Velrix felt his worst fears confirmed. The core regulator has developed autonomous defensive protocols. It interprets your bypass as an attack. Can we shut it down? Sarah asked. Not without losing all power to the station, Korvik said, having joined them in the control center. The core regulator is the heart of everything. If it stops, we all die immediately. Sarah stood, her expression intense with concentration. Then we need to go to the source. Physically access the core regulator and manually override its defensive protocols. That is suicide, Velrix said flatly. The core regulator is located in the central maintenance shaft. It is currently flooded with radiation from the cascade failure. Exposure would be fatal within minutes. How many minutes? For a Xanthari? Approximately 7 minutes before cellular degradation becomes irreversible. And for a human? Velrix consulted his internal database. Human physiology is more resistant to certain radiation types. Perhaps 12 minutes. But that is still insufficient. It would take at least 20 minutes to access the regulator, perform the override, and return to safety. Sarah turned to her crew. Rodriguez, if someone could get to the core regulator, could they perform a manual override? Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding what Sarah was proposing. Yes, but Captain, how long would the override take? 5 minutes. Maybe 6 if things go wrong. Sarah pulled out her tablet and began calculating. 12 minutes of exposure, 6 minutes of work. That leaves 6 minutes to get in and out. Captain Chen, Velrix said, his voice carrying all 4 harmonics of urgent warning. You cannot be considering this. I don't see another option, Commander. Your people can't survive the exposure long enough. My people might. Barely. Might is not certainty. No, but it's better odds than waiting for certain death. Sarah turned to her crew. I need a volunteer, someone small enough to fit through the maintenance shaft access points and skilled enough to perform the override under pressure. Every member of her crew raised their hands without hesitation. Velrix felt his understanding of human shift again. They knew the risk. They knew it was likely fatal. Yet every one of them volunteered. Sarah's expression became both proud and pained. I need Rodriguez here managing the bypass nodes. Jenkins, you're too tall for the narrow sections. Martinez, you have a family waiting for you back on Earth. She turned to the young man with green eyes. Thompson, can you do this? Thompson nodded, his face pale but determined. Yes, Captain. No, Sarah said softly. I'm sorry. I can't ask you to do this. You're 23 years old. Captain, that's an order, Thompson. Sarah took a deep breath. I'll go. I've been crawling through maintenance shafts since before you were born, and if anyone's going to die on a Xanthari station today, it should be the captain who convinced everyone this was a good idea. Rodriguez grabbed Sarah's arm. Captain, you can't. Yes, I can. Get me a radiation suit and the override instructions. We're running out of time. 20 minutes later, Sarah Chen stood at the entrance to the central maintenance shaft, wearing a bulky human radiation suit that Velrix's sensors indicated would provide minimal protection. She carried a portable computer, a toolkit, and a communication device. Sarah, Velrix said, using her personal name for the first time. There must be another way. If there is, we haven't found it, Sarah replied through the suit's speaker. Commander, if I don't make it back, Rodriguez knows how to complete the bypass. Trust her. Trust my crew. They'll save your station. Why are you doing this? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Because someone has to. And because 12,000 lives are worth more than one. She entered the shaft before Velrix could respond. He watched her progress on the monitoring systems, her suit's beacon moving deeper into the irradiated zone. His sensors tracked her radiation exposure climbing steadily. 6 minutes passed. 8. 10. I've reached the core regulator. Sarah's voice crackled over the communication system. Beginning override now. Velrix watched the readouts with an intensity that made his eyes ache. Sarah's hands moved across the physical controls of the regulator, following Rodriguez's instructions transmitted through the increasingly unstable communication link. 12 minutes. Sarah's radiation exposure entered the dangerous zone. Override 60% complete, she reported, her voice strained. Systems are responding. 14 minutes. Velrix's medical readouts showed Sarah's cellular structure beginning to break down. Override 90% complete. Just a few more seconds. 15 minutes. The displays in the control center suddenly stabilized. Red indicators turned yellow, then green. The core regulator accepted the override command. The defensive protocols disengaged. Throughout the station, systems began to restore themselves, no longer fighting against the human bypass nodes. It's done, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Systems are stable. I'm coming back now. Negative, Captain Chen, Velrix said, making a decision that violated every protocol he knew. Remain at the core regulator. I am dispatching a medical team with emergency radiation treatment. We have developed countermeasures that may work on human physiology. Commander, your people need that medicine more than... My people are not currently dying from radiation poisoning, Velrix interrupted. You are. And after what you have done for us, I will not allow you to perish in a maintenance shaft. That is an order, Captain Chen, one that I expect you to follow. There was a long pause. Then Sarah laughed, a weak but genuine sound. Yes, Commander. I'll wait for your medical team. The Zenthari Emergency Medical Unit reached Sarah with minutes to spare. They administered treatments that had never been tested on human biology, adapting their protocols in real time, based on her physiological responses. It was improvisation of the sort that the Zenthari rarely practiced. But they had learned something from the humans. Sometimes survival required abandoning perfect procedures. 72 hours later, Captain Sarah Chen sat in Commander Velrix's office looking tired but alive. The medical treatments had worked, though her doctors predicted she would need ongoing care for months. Station Meridian 7 is fully operational, Velrix reported. All systems are stable. Your bypass nodes have been integrated into our infrastructure as redundancy measures. They performed flawlessly. I'm glad we could help, Sarah said. Help? Velrix repeated. Captain Chen, you saved 12,000 lives. You risked everything for people you had never met. Of a species you barely knew, expecting nothing in return. I have spent my entire life believing that logic and precision were the highest values. You have shown me that sometimes the most logical choice is to act with courage and compassion. He placed a data crystal on the desk between them. This is my official report to the Zenthari High Command. I have recommended that formal diplomatic relations be established with humanity. I have also recommended that human crews be granted full access to Zenthari stations and resources, and I have proposed a technology exchange program. We can teach humans about precision engineering. Perhaps you can teach us about improvisation and adaptability. Sarah picked up the crystal, turning it in her fingers. That's very generous, Commander. It is logical, Velrix corrected. Your species has qualities that complement our own. Together we would be stronger than either species alone. That is not sentiment. That is simple mathematics, Sarah smiled. Commander Velrix, I think you might be learning to think like a human. I hope not, Velrix said, but his dermal pattern showed amusement. One species that operates on organized chaos is sufficient for the galaxy. As Sarah stood to leave, Velrix added one more thing. The medical supplies you were carrying to the Kelvari colonies. My government has agreed to expedite their customs clearance and provide escort ships to ensure they arrive quickly. It seems your mission of compassion will succeed after all. Thank you, Commander. That means more to me than any trade agreement. I know, Velrix said. and that is precisely why I arranged it. After Sarah had departed, Velric stood alone in his office looking out at the stars. Station Meridian 7 would continue its operations, now stronger and more resilient than before. The humans had left their mark on his station, not just in the jury-rigged technology keeping his systems alive, but in the lesson they had taught him. Precision was valuable. Logic was essential, but sometimes survival required the courage to act without perfect information, to risk everything for others, and to trust in improvisation when all procedures had failed. The humans had a phrase for it. Sarah had taught it to him during her recovery. Sometimes, she had said, you just have to figure it out as you go. Velrix uploaded his report to the Zenthari High Command, knowing it would change everything. Humanity had proven itself worthy of respect, not despite their chaotic methods, but because of them. They had shown that there was more than one path to excellence. The galaxy, Velrix reflected, had just become a far more interesting place. And somewhere in the black between the stars, the wandering star continued its journey, carrying its crew of brave, stubborn, impossible humans toward the next crisis that needed their particular brand of solution, because that was what humans did. They saw problems and fixed them. They saw people suffering and helped them. They saw impossible odds and laughed. And sometimes, just sometimes, they saved entire stations with nothing but duct tape, determination, and a willingness to risk everything for people they had never met. That, Velrix had learned, was the essence of humanity, and the galaxy would never be the same.